Hey guys, tonight we are wandering into the desert, where the sands move like oceans under the moon, and every shadow might hide something older than your imagination. You're out here barefoot. Well, not literally barefoot, because you'd probably regret that in 2 steps. But the kind of barefoot you feel when you realise the desert is bigger than your life, your problems, and your search history combined. The stars are spread like crushed diamonds across the sky, and the air tastes dry, as if even water abandoned this place centuries ago. You probably won't survive this, but luckily tonight's story doesn't need you to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not here to hold your hand through algorithms. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing how this odd little community maps itself across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert is never silent. That's one of those small lies you only realise when you're out here at midnight. You hear wind scraping over the dunes, a long hiss like sandpaper against glass. Sometimes it sounds like whispers, and when you've listened long enough, the whispers take shape into words you almost understand. Stories about Djinn, spirits made of smokeless fire, as old as creation, as tricky as your phone's autocorrect when it decides you meant ducking. You trudge along the caravan road, though calling it a road is generous. It's just the faint outline of packed sand carved by centuries of traders who hauled spices, silks, and gossip between empires. You picture camels swaying like ships at sea, bells jingling in the dark. Mainstream historians like to point out that these caravan routes connected cultures more efficiently than many later highways. Entire cities rose from nothing just because thirsty traders needed a water stop. But the quirky tidbit the guidebooks forget. Some travellers swore the wells themselves were haunted, and that if you drank at the wrong one, you'd dream of voices that never stopped speaking. Imagine Yelp reviews for haunted oases. Great water but constant nightmares, 3 stars. The cool thing is, even ancient scholars couldn't quite agree on what the Djinn were. Some said fallen angels, others said another species entirely, just neighbours who happened to live in a dimension slightly tilted from ours. Historians still argue whether the stories of Djinn were attempts to explain mental illness, sudden desert storms, or just a way to keep children from wandering too far at night. Regardless, the myth stuck. Humans always need someone, or something, to blame. As you climb a ridge of sand, the wind picks up and throws grains in your face. It feels like nature itself is exfoliating you against your will. The stars above blaze in strange patterns, and you can't help but notice how clear the sky is compared to the smoggy haze back home. No satellites blinking, no planes whining overhead, just raw darkness and speckles of ancient fire. Somewhere out there, a comet drags its tail across the firmament. You wonder if this is the same night, long ago, when a certain child was born beneath just such a streak of light. But that's not tonight's concern. Tonight you're just trying to keep walking, keep listening, keep feeling that edge between myth and reality. There's a reason the desert feels like a storybook. Every dune looks like it hides something, a lost city, a buried caravan, or maybe just your dignity if you trip. The silence between the gusts of wind presses heavy, almost humming in your ears. And then comes the smallest thing, a pebble tumbling down the slope, though no one else is around to kick it loose. That's how the desert plays with you. It gives you sounds you can't source, movements you can't prove, and the suggestion that maybe you're being followed. You pause. The air tastes faintly metallic, like lightning before a storm. Another whisper, low this time, curls out of the dunes. The Djinn are close, not yet seen, but felt. They don't arrive with trumpets or banners. They arrive with little shifts in reality, like your shadow looking too long, or your footprints vanishing faster than the wind can cover them. But you keep walking, because that's the secret of this desert road. Everyone who ever crossed it did so while half believing something was watching. And now, tonight, it's your turn to join the story. The road, or what you're calling a road, is a memory written in sand. Each step you take presses into the ground, only to be swallowed again by the shifting dunes. You start to wonder if you're really going anywhere, or if the desert is just recycling your footprints like a lazy photocopier. The stars overhead keep you oriented, though. You've got Orion leaning over your shoulder, and the Pleiades blinking at you like a cluster of tiny watchful eyes. Out here, constellations are your GPS, your clock, and sometimes your only company. Caravan routes have always been arteries of human history. You think about how frankincense once travelled these same stretches, carried on camels with knees wrapped in thick pads. Historians note that frankincense was so valuable, it was sometimes worth more than gold by weight in Rome. Imagine lugging a sack of dried tree resin across 1,000 miles just to keep Caesar's temples smelling fancy. But there's the quirky bit. Some Bedouin tribes swore that if you burned frankincense in the wrong season, Djinn would gather round the smoke like moths to a flame. You can picture some ancient merchant nervously wafting incense, muttering, "Please don't summon anything weird. Please don't summon anything weird." The longer you walk, the more voices you hear. Not loud, never loud, but threaded into the wind. Merchants told stories of spirits who meddled with caravans, scattering camels, hiding water skins, or whispering bargains in the ears of exhausted travellers. You imagine one of those old traders sitting by the fire, sipping bitter coffee, swearing he once watched a djinn snuff out a torch just to hear the humans panic. Historians still argue whether such tales were exaggerations, desert hallucinations, or clever ways to explain theft and sabotage along the road. A missing bag of grain sounds a lot more dramatic when you blame it on a smokeless spirit instead of your careless cousin. The moon climbs higher, laying a path of pale light across the sand. Your shadow stretches absurdly long, thin as a reed, like it wants to detach itself and slither away. A caravan bell echoes faintly, except there's no caravan, just you. That's the trick of this land. Sound travels weirdly. A voice shouted a mile away can feel like it's murmuring in your ear, while something happening right beside you can vanish into the air. You pass the skeleton of an old well, half buried, its stones crumbling like stale bread. Wells were lifelines, the beating hearts of trade routes. Cities rose where water pooled, and empires bent their maps around them. You lean close, half expecting to see water glimmering below, but there's only darkness, bottomless and patient. People used to say that some wells had voices. Drop a pebble, and instead of a splash you'd hear whispers returning from the deep. Maybe it was wind, maybe it was acoustics, or maybe it was something waiting down there, amused at your curiosity. You keep walking, sand crunches underfoot like ground glass. The desert sky feels heavy, almost pushing down on your shoulders. There's a strange comfort in it, like being under a massive dome, safe yet small. You think about how countless others once made this same trek. Scholars, pilgrims, soldiers, smugglers. Each carried their fears and their stories, and all of them stared at the same stars overhead. Then something flickers at the edge of your vision. A glow, not from the stars, not from the moon, but from the ground. You crouch, brushing away sand until you uncover shards of glassy stone. Desert glass, melted into existence by an ancient meteor strike, or maybe a lightning bolt that punched the earth with ridiculous fury. The Egyptians prized this stuff. One pharaoh's dagger was carved from desert glass, gleaming with cosmic origins. But the odd tale, some Bedouins believed shards like these were djinn scales, shed when the spirits dragged themselves across the dunes. You roll one in your palm. It's warm, too warm. You stand, tucking the shard into your pocket. It's probably nothing. But then again, that's what everyone says before their night gets interesting. And sure enough, in the distance you spot something impossible to mistake. A flicker of firelight. No caravan should be here at this hour. No campfires should glow on this abandoned road. Yet the light bobs, faint, beckoning, promising both danger and company. The desert is wide, the road is empty, and the stories you've heard whisper louder than the wind. Sometimes the fire you walk toward isn't made of wood at all. Sometimes it's the breath of a djinn, waiting. The fire ahead dances like a mirage, flickering between reality and illusion. You blink, and it almost vanishes, then flares again with a pulse that seems in rhythm with your heartbeat. You press forward anyway, because what else are you going to do? Turn around and ask the sand for directions. Each step crunches lightly, and your footprints glow faintly for a second before fading, as if the desert itself is testing your resolve. And then you hear it, not the wind, not your imagination, but the unmistakable sound of a baby crying. A thin, piercing wail cuts through the night, fragile and desperate. You freeze, because nothing about this makes sense. Out here, on a road abandoned by caravans centuries ago, but the sound insists, and curiosity is the kind of curse humans have never been able to shake. You follow the glow until you reach a hollow in the dunes. The fire you saw is not a campfire at all, but a streak across the heavens, a comet blazing through the sky, so bright it throws shadows on the sand. It burns greenish-white, a ghostly lantern dragging its tail from horizon to horizon. Ancient astronomers obsessed over such lights. Chinese records from more than 2,000 years ago carefully noted their paths, while Roman historians thought them omens of catastrophe, plagues, assassinations, the whole apocalyptic checklist. Historians still argue whether the comet that passed in 12 BCE was the same one later named Halley's, and whether its appearance influenced religious stories that survived into later centuries. But for you, it's not just an omen, it's the backdrop, because lying in the sand, wrapped in a rough cloth, is the source of the crying, a newborn child. You kneel. The child's eyes open, and for a moment you almost stumble backward. They're not the eyes of a helpless infant. They shine, faintly, like reflected starlight caught in a well. You feel heat from the comet above, but the air around the child is cool, as though the desert is bending itself to cradle them. People in these lands once said that children born under rare celestial events were touched by destiny. There's a mainstream historical example too. Alexander the Great's birth was rumoured to coincide with lightning striking the Macedonian palace. Sure, that's probably propaganda designed to make him sound extra cool in battle speeches, but it stuck because people need their heroes marked by the sky. The quirky footnote: in some Arabic folklore, a comet meant the Djinn were out hunting, searching for lost or stolen stars. If a child was born then, people whispered it might be half human, half something else. The baby's crying softens as you lift them gently. They're heavier than you expect, not in weight but in presence, as if you're carrying both flesh and story at once. Around you, the dunes fall silent, the wind holds its breath. The comet's tail paints your skin silver, and you swear you see faint script etched across it. Words too old to understand, like the sky itself is writing a prophecy above your head. You glance around, expecting to see someone, anyone, claiming this child. But there's no one, only the endless sand, the ringing stars, and the impossible certainty that this infant isn't ordinary. Your instincts shout it, and every folk tale you've ever half ignored hums louder in your head. And just as you settle the child against your shoulder, the desert answers back. The sand stirs, not from wind, but from something beneath. A ripple spreads like a serpent moving under a blanket, and you feel the air prickle with static. Then, with a rush of smoke and sparks, a figure rises, tall, shifting, neither entirely solid nor completely mist. Eyes like burning coals peer from the haze. A djinn has arrived. You've heard the stories. They can crush mountains, slip through cracks, vanish into fire. Some serve willingly, others trick their masters, and still others wander free, untamed and unpredictable. The mainstream fact, even in early Islamic texts, Djinn are described as creatures created from smokeless fire, sharing the earth with humans yet hidden from view. The quirky belief? Travellers once claimed you could trap one in a copper vessel, seal it with lead, and toss it into the sea, kind of like Tupperware for supernatural beings. Historians still argue whether those tales symbolised actual folk practices or were just metaphorical warnings about greed and hubris. The figure tilts its head, and the smoke curls closer, brushing your arms. The child in your grasp stops crying entirely, their glowing eyes fixed on the Djinn. For the briefest moment, you sense recognition between them, as if the comet overhead tied their fates together long before you stumbled into this night. The Djinn speaks, voice layered like a chorus carried on the wind. The child is not yours, but neither are they mine. The stars have marked them. You may carry them, if you dare. Your mouth is dry, your heart is louder than the wind. But you nod, because really, what else are you going to do? The Djinn doesn't vanish right away. It lingers, coiling and uncoiling like smoke trapped in a bottle you can't quite seal. Its form is never stable, sometimes tall as a minaret, sometimes small enough to seem human-sized, flickering between shapes the way a flame leaps before it dies. You hold the child tighter, the fabric of their cloth scratching against your skin, and for the first time since stepping into this desert, you realise you're not entirely in charge of your own story anymore. The oasis appears suddenly, as if the desert allowed you to see it only when you needed it. Palm trees rise out of nowhere, their fronds swaying in a breeze you don't feel. The air is heavy with the smell of dates, sweet and cloying, and somewhere water burbles like laughter in a deep throat. Oases always carried a double edge, salvation for travellers, but also danger, because not all pools were what they seemed. Historians like to remind us that oases determined the rise and fall of empires in North Africa. Whoever controlled the water controlled the trade, and thus the wealth. But tucked in folklore is a stranger claim, that some oases were illusions conjured by Djinn to lure the thirsty to their deaths. Imagine dying not from thirst, but from drinking what isn't even water. You step closer. The pool ripples, reflecting stars and comet light in strange symmetry, and on the far bank, the Djinn waits. No longer smoke, no longer shifting, but solid this time, if solid can describe a creature glowing faintly like embers pressed under skin. Its eyes lock on yours, and for the first time it smiles, or something close to it. You carry the child of the stars, the Djinn says. The voice is layered, but softer now, almost intimate. Few mortals would dare. Fewer still would be permitted. You want to ask what that means, but words stick in your throat. The baby stirs, lifting one tiny hand toward the water. The ripples follow the motion, as though obeying. The Djinn steps forward, feet not touching sand or water, but gliding as though the earth is bending itself to carry them. I am not your enemy, it says, nor am I your friend, but I will walk with you, for our fates touch here, and what touches once cannot be untangled. That's not exactly reassuring. You shift uncomfortably, like someone just told you your favourite barista might actually be an undercover spy. Still, you sense no threat, at least not immediate. The desert is heavy with silence, except for the slow bubbling of the pool. A mainstream fact comes to mind. Across the Islamic Golden Age, scholars debated the nature of Djinn. Were they free-willed like humans, capable of good and evil, or were they bound to trickery by design? Philosophers spilled ink for centuries over this, scribbling notes under candlelight while cats probably sat on their manuscripts. The quirky tidbit: some old texts mention Djinn as lovers of poetry, secretly whispering verses into the ears of human poets who then took credit. Imagine finding out your favourite medieval love sonnet was actually ghostwritten by a fire spirit. Historians still argue whether such tales were allegories for inspiration or sincere beliefs about supernatural muses. The Djinn leans closer, heat radiating from their form, though the child in your arms doesn't flinch. "I am bound," it admits. "Not by you, not yet, but by stars, by fire, by promises older than your kind remembers." Bound. That word hangs in the air like smoke that won't clear. You want to ask, bound to what? Bound how? But the Djinn moves first. It gestures to the pool. The water darkens, and images form. Caravans trudging across sand, cities gleaming with brass domes, armies clashing in a storm of dust. The child is always there, small at first, then older, walking among rulers and rebels alike, always with the comet's light flickering behind. The vision snaps shut like a book slammed closed. The Djinn's ember eyes flare. Carry them well, or the desert will reclaim what the stars gave. You exhale slowly, as though you've been holding your breath for hours. The child gurgles softly, unfazed, as if a prophecy and a flame spirit are just part of a normal Tuesday night. You, on the other hand, feel like you've just been signed up for a marathon you didn't train for. The Djinn drifts back into the palms, body thinning into smoke until only the glow of its eyes lingers. "We will meet again," it says, and then the oasis dims. The palms are suddenly less lush, the water dull, the sweetness gone from the air. You're left alone with the child, the comet fading above, and the knowledge that nothing about this journey will be ordinary again. The desert feels heavier after the oasis encounter, as if the sand itself is now watching you. You trudge forward with the child pressed against your chest, your thoughts circling around that one word the Djinn dropped, bound. Bound to what? Bound to who? You don't have answers, just a nagging sense that you've signed onto a contract written in starlight without ever touching a pen. Night stretches long, the comet dimming to a faint smear, until at last dawn crawls across the horizon. The sky bruises purple, then orange, and the dunes glow gold like hammered metal. Morning in the desert always feels too sharp, too exposing. You miss the cloak of darkness, the way it hid your questions. The baby stirs in your arms, and for the first time you notice how unnaturally calm they are, like a child who already knows too much, and that's never a good sign. By midday, you stumble upon another set of ruins, stone pillars half buried in sand, their carvings worn into ghostly outlines. It's here the Djinn finds you again, not in fire and smoke this time, but in a breeze that coils around the stones. "You seek guidance," the voice murmurs. "Guidance has a price." You sigh, because of course it does. Nothing supernatural ever works on a free trial basis. The pact begins almost casually. The Djinn offers you knowledge of safe paths, the ability to find water when you're near death, and, more unnervingly, the power to hush the child when their starborn aura stirs too strongly. In return, it wants a promise of choice. The phrase is so vague it could mean anything, from lending your Wi-Fi password to handing over your soul, but you nod, because you're outnumbered here by eternity itself. Mainstream history loves its pacts. Medieval chronicles are full of rulers making oaths with powers they barely understood, sometimes with other empires, sometimes with saints, and sometimes with whatever force they thought would grant them an edge. The quirky tidbit. There are actual records of explorers carrying tiny written contracts folded into their clothes, letters addressed not to humans, but to spirits, asking for protection or bargaining for treasure. Historians still argue whether these contracts were symbolic charms, or whether people truly expected some fiery accountant to enforce them. The Djinn doesn't hand you parchment. Instead, it instructs you to place a finger into the sand. You obey, tracing a single line. The grain beneath your fingertips sizzles, glowing briefly like a coal. When you lift your hand, the mark remains, a thin trail that doesn't fade in the wind. The Djinn whispers, "It is written, it is witnessed." The child watches silently, eyes reflecting the burning line. For an instant, you think you see recognition again. as if this isn't their first pact, but merely the continuation of something older. That thought alone is enough to keep your heart hammering. Then, with a faint shimmer, the Djinn vanishes, leaving you with nothing but the mark in the sand and a weight on your shoulders heavier than the baby you're carrying. The heat grows unbearable, so you press on, searching for shade. In the distance, the faint outline of walls shimmers, the promise of a city, civilization, maybe answers, maybe just stronger headaches. The pact hangs in your mind, taut as a rope stretched between dunes. And though the child rests quietly, you can't shake the sense that the desert itself is listening now, eager to see what you'll do with the bargain you've just accepted. The mirage doesn't vanish this time. The shimmer on the horizon thickens, sharpens, until towers and domes rise like molten brass hammered into place by the sun itself. You squint against the glare, wondering if your eyes are lying, but as you crest another dune, the city solidifies. Walls studded with copper plates gleam like a second sunrise. Minarets pierce the sky, and beyond them you glimpse marketplaces teeming with colour and noise. This is no phantom oasis. This is the city of brass, at least. That's what the old stories would call it. You tighten your grip on the child, feeling the weight of the pact thrumming like a second pulse in your wrist. Cities like this were the lungs of the desert. Inhale, caravans full of goods. Exhale, culture, rumour, and ambition. Historians point out that such urban hubs were experiments in survival, where water systems and trade routes decided everything. And yet, the quirky detail is that some travellers swore these places could vanish overnight, swallowed by dunes, leaving only silence where laughter had been. Historians still argue whether those vanished cities were swallowed by sandstorms, abandoned due to disease, or, if you listen to the storytellers, spirited away by Djinn tired of human noise. You approach the gates. They are not guarded by men, but by massive bronze doors carved with patterns that shift when you're not looking. One moment you see geometric spirals, the next, faces of creatures with eyes that glow faintly before winking out. You knock, though you're not sure if knocking is the right protocol for sentient metal. The doors swing open anyway, as though the city already knows you're coming. Inside, chaos breathes. Merchants shout in a dozen languages. Spices perfume the air, cinnamon, saffron, cardamom, all mixing until your nose feels both blessed and assaulted. Street musicians pluck strings that hum like bees in jars. Children dart between stalls, laughing, sticky with honeyed figs. You should feel comfort, relief even, but there's something just slightly off. Shadows here linger longer than they should. Some figures wear veils that seem to ripple not with cloth but with smoke. The child stirs in your arms. People glance your way, then glance again, eyes catching on the faint starlight in those tiny irises. Whispers ripple, a few bow their heads. Others cross themselves with charms, muttering about omens. Word spreads faster than wildfire. A comet-born child has entered the gates. The Djinn doesn't appear openly, but you sense it. Every time you step into an alleyway, the air warms. Every time you linger at a fountain, the water darkens for an instant before clearing. It's as though your pact is stamped invisibly on your forehead, and the city itself is reading it. You wander into the marketplace, trying to blend. A scholar sits under an awning of indigo cloth, rolling scrolls between his palms. He catches your eye and beckons. His voice is cracked with age, but sharp with curiosity. "A child of the stars," he murmurs, not as question but as statement. He scribbles notes quickly, dipping his reed pen into ink that smells faintly of iron. He tells you this city has waited centuries for such a figure, that brass walls were built not only for defence but for prophecy. You want to laugh, but his eyes are steady, too convinced to dismiss. The mainstream fact, in the Abbasid period, entire libraries were dedicated to astrology, mapping comet paths, lunar eclipses, and planetary conjunctions with terrifying accuracy. Caliphs consulted these charts before wars, marriages, and even garden parties. The quirky tidbit, one court astrologer was said to predict outcomes by observing the way cats leapt at shadows in the courtyard. Imagine staking imperial policy on whether Whiskers prefers pouncing east or west. Historians still argue whether these practices were genuine science, superstition, or both tangled together like incense smoke. The scholar leans in. "Be wary of bargains," he whispers. "Djinn promise much, but they count differently than men. A price agreed upon is never the price paid." He smiles faintly, as if he's speaking from experience. You wander deeper into the city, carrying the warning like a pebble in your shoe. The brass gleam of the streets dazzles your eyes, but the shadows seem to grow thicker, stretching like hands that want to pull you under. The child gazes at everything calmly, as though the world is unfolding exactly as expected. And you realize the pact is not just a weight on your chest, it's a leash, one end in your hand, the other somewhere deep in the smoke of a djinn who never quite stops watching. The city does not sleep. By night, the brass walls reflect torchlight so fiercely that the streets glow as though lit by a second sun. Traders from distant lands continue haggling, their hands slicing the air in sharp gestures. Drums echo from courtyards, where dancers twirl with veils of fire. And everywhere, always, the sense that something else is watching from the seams of the city, between lantern flames, under awnings, in the wells where water should run clear but sometimes doesn't. You walk through these restless streets, the child quiet against your chest. The comet-born gaze has drawn attention, and now people treat you like both curiosity and omen. A baker offers you bread without asking for coin, muttering, "For good fortune." A jeweller presses a small charm into your palm, whispering, "For protection." Yet for every hand that gives, another retracts, pulling their children close, spitting on the ground to ward off ill luck. Cities run on gossip more than coin, and by dawn your presence has become both prophecy and curse. The djinn, of course, is near. You can feel it in the flicker of every torch, the hush of every shadow. It doesn't speak aloud, but the pact vibrates in your blood like a plucked string. You sense approval, amusement, a predator content to let you wander inside its trap, so long as you don't forget who set the bait. At the city's heart stands a great square, paved in brass tiles polished so smooth they reflect the stars above. Except tonight, the reflections do not match the sky. You tilt your head back, and the constellations overhead shimmer in their usual order, Orion's belt tight across the heavens. But in the brass tiles below, the stars form other patterns entirely, spirals, sigils, shapes that suggest eyes opening. You nearly stumble as the child leans forward to stare, tiny hands outstretched. Historians love this square. They write of how medieval cities often used geometry to blend science, religion, and civic pride. Brass inlays served as giant sundials or even celestial charts. Astronomers could stand at its centre, track shadows, and announce eclipses months in advance. The quirky detail. Some claim that certain tiles hummed faintly when stepped on during a full moon. Pilgrims swore it was the city itself singing back to the stars. A group of robed astrologers gather round the square now, their beards glinting with gold dust as though starlight clung to them. They motion for you to enter. "The child belongs here," one declares, voice heavy with ritual certainty. They ask not your name, not your origin, but the moment of birth, the exact hour the comet burned across the heavens. You stammer, realizing you never knew. The djinn did, of course. You feel its smoke curl inside your ribs, whispering the answer before you even speak. You repeat the time, and the astrologers nod as though confirming a long-held equation. One unfurls a vast chart, stars inked in careful arcs. He shows you that the child's arrival coincides with a rare conjunction, 3 planets crossing a fiery comet's tail. Such events, he explains, mean upheaval, kingdoms topple, rivers shift course, crops fail or flourish in impossible abundance. He does not say whether this child will be a blessing or catastrophe, perhaps both. The crowd around the square grows. Musicians silence their drums. Merchants pause mid-sail. Everyone waits for a sign, and then it comes. The brass tiles beneath your feet heat suddenly, as though the city has drawn breath. The reflected stars below begin to spin, faster and faster, until they blur into a single whirlpool of light. The child lets out a soft cry, not fear, but recognition, as though this was always meant to happen. From the spinning brass reflection rises a shape, tall, shifting, smoke and flame bound in vague human form. The Djinn, not hidden, not whispered, but revealed before the city. Gasps ripple, some fall to their knees, others scatter in terror. The Djinn's voice does not come from its mouth, but from the walls themselves, vibrating through every tile, every stone. The pact is witnessed. You clutch the child tighter, heart hammering, as the city itself holds its breath. The pact lingers in the air long after the Djinn's form dissipates. The brass tiles cool, the whirlpool of stars fades back into harmless reflections, and the crowd resumes breathing. You do too, though your chest feels heavy, as if the city itself pressed down on you, around you. The mood fractures. Some faces glow with awe, others contort with dread. An old woman shouts that the comet child is blessed, another cries out that the end is near, and a boy throws dates into the air as offerings. You shuffle backward, clutching the child, who blinks wide-eyed at the fading shimmer. The astrologers bow, not to you, but to the infant. They murmur calculations, already charting wars and harvests in their minds. To them, the child is less person and more equation. The Djinn's declaration has given their theories weight, and in this city, belief spreads faster than fire in a spice market. By dawn, murals are painted of your figure standing on glowing brass, the Djinn towering above. You pass one wall and laugh, though it comes out nervous and hollow, because in the painting your hair is longer, your robe finer, your expression heroic. Funny how history edits you before you're even gone, you mutter. A scholar sitting nearby, overhearing, nods in agreement. He tells you that ancient chroniclers often twisted events to fit cosmic narratives. Roman historians, for instance, described emperors' births alongside earthquakes or eclipses to lend weight to their reigns. The quirky twist? Sometimes those omens were written retroactively, fabricated decades later when convenient. He leans closer, voice soft. The same may happen here. Already scribes argue over what really happened on those tiles. Then, with a smirk, historians still argue whether comets predict doom or simply happen to appear at inconvenient times. The scholar offers you dates and insists on guiding you through the city. You follow reluctantly, wary of being watched. The streets are alive with rumour. You hear your name mixed with words like prophet, curse, and Djinn spawn. One child runs up and touches the comet-born infant's hand, then runs off squealing, "I'll never be sick again." Another child spits 3 times, yelling, "Keep it away." Cities are like mirrors, reflecting everything at once, with little care for truth. As night deepens, your guide leads you toward the city's quieter quarters, where polished brass gives way to cracked stone. He explains that this was once the original settlement, before the Djinn, or some say engineers, expanded it with impossible metals. Down here, the alleys bend strangely, never quite straight, and some doors open into walls. He warns you not to linger near wells. People whisper that shadows climb out of them. You pause at one such well, leaning over. The water reflects not your face, but the child's, multiplied into dozens of versions, each blinking at different speeds, some even smiling when yours does not. You recoil, heart racing, but the scholar only shrugs. This city was never built for ordinary eyes, he says. It was built for watchers, whether human, djinn, or something else. No one agrees. The child grows restless. You cradle them closer, whispering nonsense syllables like lullabies, though secretly hoping the sound muffles your own unease. Above, the brass towers gleam faintly under moonlight, turning the whole skyline into a jagged crown. You wonder what king or djinn rules here, or if the city itself is the true sovereign. That night, sleep does not come easily. You lie on a borrowed mat, the scholar snoring in the corner, while the child stares unblinking into the rafters. You trace the flicker of torchlight across the beams, trying to imagine home, trying to imagine silence. But silence never lasts here. In the distance, you hear pipes, drums, even the clatter of dice. The city does not know rest. When your eyes finally close, dreams drag you into brass corridors that stretch on forever. Doors open onto deserts, seas, skies, and in each, the djinn stands, smiling with smoke for teeth. It whispers that the pact is not just binding you, but the city itself. You wake sweating, clutching the child, half convinced the walls still hum with its laughter. Morning reveals no relief. Already, the square bustles again, pilgrims arriving to see where the djinn appeared. Merchants sell fragments of brass tiles, likely ordinary scrap metal. Street performers reenact the glowing whirlpool, complete with smoke pots. You even spot a man dressed as you, holding a painted wooden doll comet child. The crowd tosses coins at his feet. You can't decide whether to laugh or scream. Perhaps both. Still, you press forward. The city has become stage, myth, and trap, and somehow you're both spectator and actor, carrying the only child who seems to know the script. The city's heartbeat grows faster with each passing day. What was once simple curiosity now feels like frenzy, as if every alley hums with rehearsed stories about you and the comet-born child. Vendors sell charms shaped like tiny stars, mothers trace protective sigils on doorframes, and street preachers shout wildly conflicting prophecies. Some predict the child will summon rain for 1,000 years, others that deserts will swallow every river. You keep your hood low, trying to vanish into the background, but it's like trying to hide a bonfire in a darkened room. The scholar, your reluctant ally, urges you toward the city's library, claiming it might hold clues about your pact with the djinn. You agree, though unease gnaws at you. Libraries are safe, in theory. But in a place where knowledge is currency, secrets have sharp edges. The library looms at the city's edge, carved directly into a cliff of black basalt. Its doors are brass, engraved with constellations, some you recognize and others entirely alien. As they creak open, a dry wind brushes your face, scented faintly of ink and dust. You step inside, and immediately the hush swallows you whole. It's a living silence, heavy, almost suspicious, like the city itself is listening. The child squirms in your arms, their comet-bright eyes fix on the shelves, rows upon rows that stretch upward beyond sight. You could climb a ladder for days and never reach the top. The scholar mutters proudly that the library rivals even Alexandria at its peak. Then, almost sheepishly, he admits, of course, historians still argue whether half the scrolls here are genuine or clever fakes. He grins, as though that uncertainty is part of the charm. You wander between towering shelves, feeling the weight of parchment and memory. Here are medical texts describing cures involving crocodile dung poultices. Yes, that was actually a thing in ancient Egypt. People believed it cooled the skin. Over there, astronomy charts that attempt to map not just planets, but realms of angels and djinn. One scroll even insists the Earth rests on the back of a colossal fish, which itself swims in a sea of fire. You blink at that last detail, wondering whether the scribe was sleep-deprived, visionary, or just drunk on fermented dates. In a secluded alcove, the scholar finds what he was hoping for, a codex bound in cracked leather, etched with symbols that twist if you stare too long. He insists it chronicles star-born children, those rare few whose births coincided with celestial upheavals. You set the child on a cushion while he flips eagerly through brittle pages. Illustrations of glowing infants appear, each surrounded by swirls of fire or waves. Some are crowned, some chained, some devoured by shadows. The message is inconsistent, but the pattern clear. Beings like the one you hold have always disrupted the world. One passage freezes your blood. It describes a ritual, a djinn binding itself to a child of the stars, feeding on their light while guiding their fate. In return, the mortal guardian, you, becomes tethered as mediator, shield, and eventual sacrifice. You slam the book shut before the scholar can read further. He notices your pale face and arches an eyebrow. "What did it say?" You lie. That the child will shift kingdoms. He nods as if that were obvious, then launches into a tangent about medieval astrologers who swore by planetary alignments, even advising kings when to wage war. The quirky bit: one astrologer predicted that if Mars and Saturn aligned in Libra, frogs would rain from the sky. Spoiler, it didn't happen, though one poor town swore they had seen damp toads everywhere. As he talks, you glance at the child. They sit quietly, tracing tiny fingers along the cracked leather of the codex. The symbols flare briefly under their touch, glowing faintly blue. Neither you nor the scholar say anything, but you both see it. The silence grows sharp. You snatch the child back, murmuring a shaky excuse, and hurry toward the exit. Outside, the brass streets feel almost comforting compared to the library's hungry silence. You vow not to return, though you know the book's words will haunt you. That night, lying awake in your cramped lodging, you imagine futures branching in every direction. In one, the child grows into savior, leading cities to peace. In another, they blaze like a comet, burning everything they touch. And in all of them, the djinn waits, smiling. The scholar snores again in the corner. You consider shaking him just to break the tension, but then the child gurgles softly, pointing upward at the cracked ceiling as if stars shine through where there are none. You whisper to them, voice trembling, "Let's hope history paints you kindly." The city begins to itch with tension, as though the brass itself resents holding so many secrets. Word spreads of the child's visit to the library, even though you never told a soul. Rumours work like smoke here. They seep through cracks, cling to clothes, curl into ears. Some whisper that the child unlocked hidden scrolls. Others claim the library itself bowed. You keep your head down, but it's like walking through a bazaar with a bell tied to your neck. The scholar, unfazed, insists that history thrives on exaggeration. "Take the siege of Troy," he says while chewing figs. Historians still argue whether it even happened, or if Homer was just a poetic propagandist with a flair for gore. He shrugs, wiping his beard. Cities need myths more than facts. He doesn't seem to notice the child's comet eyes catching firelight, glowing faintly brighter every day. As nights lengthen, your dreams grow heavier. You walk corridors of brass that shift behind you, locking you deeper inside. The djinn appears more often now, not just in smoke but in reflections, polished bowls, still water, even the child's wide pupils. It laughs gently, as if this entire drama is theatre for its amusement. Sometimes it speaks in riddles. When the star falls twice, the city will choose. Other times, it says nothing at all, just watching while you squirm. One evening, the scholar drags you to a gathering on the city's rooftop gardens, the elite lounge among fountains that spray water in unnatural arcs. whispering about omens while sipping spiced wine. You hover at the edge, clutching the child, wary of both silk-clad nobles and the shadows flickering behind their lanterns. A court astrologer, resplendent in robes glittering with stitched constellations, beckons you forward. He announces to the audience that the child's comet-born light will decide whether the city prospers or falls. He gestures grandly toward the sky, where a second comet burns faintly, trailing green fire. Gasps ripple through the crowd. You squint upward, realizing it looks eerily like the first one that marked the child's birth. The astrologer proclaims this the twin flame, a cosmic echo. He insists the child must be brought to the city's highest tower at the comet's zenith, where ritual fires will align brass, stars, and Djinn. If not, he warns, famine will stalk the land. Of course. You notice he slips a jewel into his sleeve mid-speech. Prophets always hedge their bets. The nobles murmur nervously. Some press gifts into your hands, rings, coins, talismans. Others mutter that you should leave, that the child is too dangerous. You feel like a pawn passed between gamblers, each one pretending to know the rules. Later, alone on the rooftop, you lean against a brass railing. The city sprawls below, glowing like a forge. You whisper into the night, "Why me? Why us?" The Djinn answers from the shadow of a potted palm. Its form flickers, tall and smoke-wrapped, eyes like furnace doors. Because you were willing to look up when others look down, that is enough. Its laugh is low, rolling, infuriating. It reminds you of an odd historical tidbit the scholar once shared. Medieval peasants feared eclipses so much they banged pots to scare away dragons they thought were eating the moon. Looking up was dangerous then too, sometimes literally. The Djinn seems to relish that echo, amused that mortals still quake at skyfire even after centuries of supposed wisdom. You swallow, clutching the child closer. They nestle against you, but their gaze stays fixed on the burning comet. Their tiny hand points toward it, as though tugging at destiny's sleeve. The scholar finds you hours later, muttering about preparations for the coming ritual. He explains that brass was once prized not only for beauty, but because alchemists thought it could channel cosmic forces. Some even believed polishing brass mirrors let them glimpse the future. He chuckles. Historians still argue whether they actually saw visions or just their own tired faces. You manage a weak laugh, but your stomach knots. The comet grows brighter each night, pulling the city towards something inevitable. Pilgrims flood the streets, chanting verses. Black market vendors sell comet dust scraped from rooftop gutters. Children run through alleys with their hands smeared in ash, pretending to be starborn themselves. And all the while, the Djinn lingers at the edge of every reflection, waiting for the moment it has already declared inevitable. When the second comet blazes at its peak, you know the city will demand a choice. And you're terrified that the child has already made it. The days blur as the comet climbs higher, carving its emerald arc across the night sky. Every evening, the city grows more frenzied. Processions fill the brass streets, priests swinging censers heavy with resin smoke, soldiers carrying banners painted with twin flames, common folk chanting until their voices rasp. You move among them unseen, or try to, though whispers trail you like the comet's tail. The child rests against your chest, strangely calm amidst the chaos. Their star-bright eyes widen each night, as though they already know what is coming. You murmur soft lullabies, but sometimes you feel they are humming back, as though tuned to a frequency you cannot hear. The scholar, now half mad with excitement, insists the ritual must be studied, not feared. He babbles about ancient alignments, citing how in Babylonian times priests tracked stars to predict harvests and floods. The skies were their calendars, their newspapers, even their gods, he explains, crumbs of bread stuck in his beard. Then, with a grin, he adds the quirky detail, Some records show they even predicted a solar eclipse down to the hour. Others claimed it was caused by an angry dragon biting the sun. Historians still argue which was taken more seriously. You can't help but laugh, though your chest aches. It's absurd, this mixture of brilliance and superstition, wisdom and fear. The city feels the same way now, walking a knife edge between enlightenment and panic. The night before the ritual, you dream again. The brass corridors return, stretching endlessly. Doors leading to deserts, oceans, even starfields. The Djinn waits at a crossroad, smoke and fire coiling lazily. Tomorrow, the pact matures, it says, voice echoing in every direction. The child's fire will either crown or consume. Do not falter. You wake with your heart racing, clutching the infant as though your arms alone could hold back destiny. At dawn, the city gathers at the base of the great tower, a spire of brass so tall it seems to pierce the comet's tail itself. Steps spiral upward in dizzying coils, banners whipping in the hot wind. Nobles, priests, merchants, and beggars alike jostle for place. Everyone wants to witness what the comet will decide. You climb the steps, the scholar wheezing beside you. The child gazes upward, unblinking, as though the tower is nothing but a ladder back to where they belong. At intervals, you pause, looking out over the city. From this height, the brass streets form strange patterns, spirals, circles, symbols. Were they designed that way? Or is your mind inventing meaning, desperate to impose order on chaos? At the summit, a vast platform awaits. A brazier the size of a house burns, flames leaping high enough to lick the sky. Priests in silver masks chant, their voices weaving through the night air. The comet glows directly overhead now, its green fire spilling like a celestial waterfall. The crowd below hums with tension, thousands holding their breath at once. You step forward, the child cradled against you. The Djinn appears beside the brazier, its smoke flickering visible to all. Gasps ripple through the audience. Some scream, some bow, some flee. The Djinn's laughter rumbles through the brass tower like distant thunder. It speaks not to you, but to the city itself. Witness the second flame. The pack demands a choice. The priests demand you place the child on the brazier's edge, to be bathed in light, purified by fire. You hesitate, every muscle trembling. The scholar mutters furiously that this is symbolic, not lethal, that brass fire cannot burn what is chosen by the stars. Easy for him to say. The child squirms, reaching toward the comet, and then light. Not firelight, not torchlight, but pure radiance, a column of green streaming down from the heavens. It strikes the brazier, igniting flames so bright you have to shield your eyes. The child laughs, a sound both human and alien, echoing off the brass walls of the city. And in that instant, everything stops. The wind stills, the chants die, even your breath falters. The city hangs suspended in silence, waiting to see whether it will be crowned or consumed. The silence is unbearable. Thousands of people hold their breath at once, and the city feels like a living chest waiting for its next inhale. The child sits in your arms, bathed in comet fire, face illuminated with otherworldly green. Their eyes reflect the blaze, brighter than stars, brighter than the brass spire beneath your feet. Then, sound. Not the roar of flame, not the mutter of the priests, but the low, resonant hum of brass itself. The entire tower vibrates, a tuning fork struck by celestial hands. The city below joins in, streets and walls and rooftops humming until the air shakes in your lungs. You stumble, clutching the child tighter, terrified you might drop them into the brazier's ravenous light. The Djinn's smoke body flares, expanding until it towers over the platform. Its voice erupts from every direction. The pact deepens. The city has chosen. Chosen what? You wait, heart pounding, but the Djinn offers no answer. Instead, it gazes down at the child, smoke eyes narrowing with something that looks disturbingly like pride. The priests collapse to their knees. Nobles wail or cheer depending on whether they believe they've won or lost. The scholar, panting, scribbles notes furiously on scraps of parchment even as the tower rattles beneath him. He mutters something about celestial harmonics and resonance chambers, trying desperately to frame this miracle as science. He even reminds you that medieval builders sometimes tuned cathedrals to amplify chants, producing acoustics so perfect that singers swore angels joined them. Historians still argue, he hisses, whether this was by design or accident. You almost laugh at his timing, except the floor beneath you cracks. The tower groans as if bearing a burden too great. Green light pours through fissures in the brass tiles. The comet seems to pull harder, its tail tethered to the spire like a rope. You stagger, nearly toppling into the brazier. The child remains eerily calm, as though none of this is danger but destiny. Below, chaos explodes. Crowds scatter, some trampling others in panic. Others kneel, chanting fervently, convinced salvation is imminent. Fires break out where brass shards fall, yet amid the madness, a few stand perfectly still, faces uplifted, smiling in bliss. The Djinn does nothing to stop the collapse. It only watches, smoke rippling, a predator savouring the unfolding feast. You scream at it, "What choice? What did we choose?" The Djinn's reply slides through your bones, "Not we, you." You realise then, the pact was never about the city. It was about you, the mortal guardian, tethered by blood, smoke, and starlight. Whatever happens next flows through your decision. The city is simply stage and witness. The child reaches out, tiny hand pointing skyward. For an instant, the comet's fire bends as though following their command. Green light arcs, striking rooftops, igniting patterns in the brass streets below. Spirals, circles, ancient sigils blaze into being. From above, the entire city becomes one vast constellation, drawn not on parchment but in metal and flame. The scholar gasps, papers fluttering from his hands. "It's a map," he croaks. Not of stars, but of something else. A gate? His words vanish in the thunder of brass plates shifting. The platform tilts. You stumble toward the edge, the abyss yawning beneath. The child laughs again, star-bright and terrifying. For a heartbeat, you see two possibilities layered atop each other like translucent paintings. In one, the city crumbles into molten ruin, swallowed by the comet's fire. In the other, it rises, brass towers stretching higher, transformed into a radiant beacon. Both futures shimmer, waiting. And you, caught between, realise that your arms are the fulcrum on which the city balances. The Djinn leans closer, smoke lips curling. Decide. The platform tilts, the tower moans, and the comet hangs overhead like a blade suspended by a thread. The Djinn's demand rattles in your chest. Decide. You clutch the child tighter, your palms slick with sweat, your heart hammering like a drum beaten for war. Below, the brass city glows in fiery sigils, a constellation sprawled across streets and rooftops. The crowd is split in two, half screaming, fleeing through alleys, half kneeling, arms stretched skyward. From this height, they look like ants scattering and worshipping all at once. You mutter under your breath, "This isn't a choice, it's a trap." The Djinn only smiles wider, its smoke twisting like a serpent coiling around your spine. The scholar grabs your sleeve, wild-eyed. Think, the child is aligning the city itself. This isn't destruction, it's transformation. He gasps, fumbling with words. Historians still argue whether the Library of Alexandria burned by accident or design. What if? He chokes on his thought as the tower lurches. You wrench free before his panic drags you down with him. The brazier erupts, green fire spilling outward, licking the night air. The comet's tail shivers, as though tethered directly to the infant in your arms. The child reaches for the flames, laughing, delighted. Their tiny hand glows, not burning but shining with the same radiance. You feel heat without pain, like sunlight pressed against your skin. A memory stirs, the codex in the library, its illustrations of star-born children, some crowned, some chained, some consumed. You wonder, was it ever truly about them, or about those who held them, decided for them, sacrificed, or saved them? You're not a king, not a scholar, just a weary traveller who looked up when others looked down. And yet the Djinn insists you must choose. The brass hum deepens, vibrating so hard your teeth ache. Spirals on the streets below rotate, aligning into a single colossal sigil. The scholar screams that it's a gateway, his voice shredded by the roar of shifting plates. To where? You shout, though no answer comes. Perhaps to the stars, perhaps into the Djinn's furnace heart. You look at the child. They blink up at you with comet eyes, innocent, infinite, terrifying. Do they understand what they are, or are they simply reflecting what you hope to see? The Djinn leans close, smoke breath searing your skin. Offer them to flame, and the city ascends. Hold them to your heart, and it falls. It's a cruel equation, one no mortal should face. Yet history is made on cruel equations. Ancient kings sacrificed children to secure harvests. Priests drowned virgins in rivers to appease rain gods. Historians still argue whether these acts changed anything, or if belief alone carried the power. You realize bitterly you are now part of that lineage. The comet flares, demanding answer. You step forward, the brazier blazing before you. The child leans eagerly toward it, as though recognizing home. Your arms tremble, not from weakness, but from unbearable weight. Behind you, the city's fate teeters. Before you, green fire promises rebirth or ruin. You whisper, almost to yourself, and what if I refuse both? The Djinn snarls, smoke curling violently. There is no refusal, only choice. But deep inside, something stubborn sparks. Perhaps the pact is not as binding as the Djinn believes. Perhaps there is a third path, hidden in the folds of starlight and brass. The child giggles, eyes glowing brighter, as though they, too, know that rules can be broken. And as the platform shakes, as the comet screams overhead, you realize you're about to gamble everything on defiance. The gamble begins with silence, not defiance shouted to the heavens, but a pause, a breath drawn and held. The Djinn leans in, expecting you to throw the child into the brazier or clutch them back in refusal. Instead, you do neither. You simply hold the infant steady, eyes locked on that writhing smoke. For the first time, the Djinn falters, its form flickers, as though unsure whether to tower or to vanish. Choose, it roars, but its voice quavers, too desperate for a being that claims eternity. You glance at the child, who is staring not at the brazier, nor at the Djinn, but at the comet. Their small hand rises, fingers splayed, as if grasping invisible strings. And you notice something the Djinn doesn't. The fire bends toward the child, not the other way around. History loves power, plays like this. Think of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, not because the Senate gave him permission, but because he acted, and the world scrambled to rewrite law around him. Historians still argue whether Caesar believed he could reshape Rome, or if he simply feared irrelevance. Either way, he forced history to bend. You feel the same pivot here. The child is not an offering, not a pawn. They are the axis. You realize, with a shiver, that the Djinn has no real authority. It's banking on your obedience, on your belief that there are only two doors. But doors are built, and you've never been much of a carpenter. You step back from the brazier, away from the Djinn's command. The tower groans, plates shifting, yet you stand firm, whispering to the infant, not theirs to decide, not even mine. The Djinn hisses, smoke twisting into jagged blades. You will unmake the city. You smirk, half exhausted, half mad. Cities unmake themselves all the time. Ask Pompeii about volcanoes, or Atlantis about rising seas. People rebuild, or they don't. A laugh escapes your throat, dry and shaky. Besides, you're not as scary as the smell of spoiled milk in July. The child laughs too, mimicking you, and the comet pulses like it's in on the joke. Light floods the tower, softer than the Djinn's fire, steadier than its fury. The scholar stares, eyes wide. You're breaking the pact. His voice trembles between horror and awe. Historians still argue whether humans ever truly defied the Djinn, or merely danced to their tune. Perhaps. You're writing the first proof. The platform tilts, but instead of collapsing, the brass sigils below shift. Spirals unwind, rearranging not into destruction, but into something calmer, a pattern resembling a star map, vast and elegant. The city hums in harmony rather than chaos, as though relieved. The Djinn thrashes, smoke scattering, unable to seize hold of the new rhythm. It screams, a sound like rust grinding, then lunges toward you, but the child raises their hand, tiny yet absolute, and the Djinn's form shatters into whirling embers. It doesn't vanish, it scatters, pieces of it absorbed into the comet's light. You stagger, clutching the child, heart pounding. So, was that victory, you mutter, though no one answers. The comet slows, its fiery path dimming. No longer a blade aimed at the world, but a lantern drifting into distance. The brazier extinguishes itself, a final sigh of smoke curling upward like incense at the end of a prayer. The scholar kneels, tears streaking his face. We're alive. His voice is hoarse, and history has no name for what just happened. You glance at the child, who yawns, as though saving a city and defying a Djinn were just another bedtime ritual. The city below begins to stir. People emerge, cautious, gazing up at the tower. They don't see a sacrifice or an ascension. They see the comet's glow fade, the Djinn's fire gone, and they cheer, confused, terrified, but grateful. History will paint this moment 100 ways, half of them contradictory. You exhale, shaky but firm. Guess we just made the footnotes a lot more complicated. The tower steadies, the brass sigils quiet, and in your arms, the child of the stars sleeps, their breath warm against your chest. The tower stands still at last, its gears groaning into silence, as if the entire city is exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. The crowd below has no idea what truly transpired, only that the comet dimmed, the fire died, and the brass lattice of their streets now resembles something like a map, or perhaps a promise. You clutch the child close, feeling the warmth of their tiny body against your chest, an anchor against the vastness of what just occurred. The Djinn is gone, not destroyed, not slain, but scattered like smoke in a draught. Maybe it will reform one day. Maybe it will haunt someone else's story. But for now, the night is yours. The scholar approaches, trembling, his hands pressed together as though in prayer. Do you realize what you've done? His voice quivers. Historians still argue whether myths can alter history, or if history merely borrows their language. You've proven both. His laugh is shaky, almost delirious. You've forced a myth to adapt. You don't answer. You just look out at the brass city, where lamps flicker back to life, and where people stumble into streets, clinging to one another. Their cheers carry upward, some calling your defiance heroic, others certain it was the child's doing. The truth will blur, as it always does. The details will dissolve into story, then legend, then bedtime tales whispered to children. You think of Troy, of how historians still debate whether it was a city of gold or just a heap of clay walls. Yet the myth endured, outlasting stone. Maybe this night will echo the same way, half believed, half doubted, entirely unforgettable. The scholar wipes his eyes, whispers, "So what happens now?" You look down at the child. Their eyes open briefly, galaxies swirling in their gaze before they drift back into slumber. You whisper back, "Now? Now we raise them, not as a weapon, not as an offering, just as a child." And for the first time, the weight in your chest lightens. The city below begins to rebuild itself in spirit, if not in stone. Merchants return to their stalls. Parents pull children from hiding places, and somewhere in the distance, music rises, hesitant, then swelling. Humanity, stubborn as ever, reclaims the night as its own. You descend the tower, step by careful step, the scholar trailing behind, muttering about records and chronicles, already half obsessed with how to preserve this truth. You know he will fail, not because he is careless, but because truth never survives intact. People will remember what comforts them, what gives them courage, what helps them sleep, and maybe that's enough. At the base of the tower you pause, the crowd sees you, sees the child cradled in your arms, and falls silent. For a heartbeat, all of them wait for your words, as though you hold not only the child but their future in your hands. You clear your throat, offer the only thing you can. Take care of your stories, they take care of you in return. The crowd murmurs are uncertain, but then someone begins to cheer, and soon it becomes a wave, washing over you, lifting the fear away. You walk through them, weary but alive, the child nestled safely. The comet is gone, the Djinn scattered, the pact undone. What remains is fragile and uncertain, but then, isn't that always the case? History is never a finished thing. It is always being written, rewritten, argued over by scholars and retold by dreamers. And now, thanks to your refusal, a new chapter begins. Word count 1088. Win down 300 words. So here you are at the end of the journey. The brass city rests quietly, its fires extinguished, its people safe once more. The tower no longer groans, and the comet has drifted into silence, leaving only the vast comfort of stars overhead. Your steps slow, and the air itself feels softer, less charged with danger, more like a lullaby humming through the streets. The child of the stars sleeps in your arms, breathing gently, their warmth a steady reminder that survival is not always about victory, but about holding on long enough to see dawn rise again. You notice how the lamps flicker across the city, glowing not like fire, but like tiny constellations scattered at your feet. The people murmur with relief, their voices fading into background hush, like waves brushing against a distant shore. All the sharp edges of the night are blunted now, as though the world itself is winding down with you. Even the scholar, ever restless, walks in silence, his questions postponed, his mind quieted by the weight of what cannot be explained. Some mysteries, after all, are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried, like stories whispered to ease someone into sleep. And so the city breathes, you breathe, and the night stretches out, endless and calm. The danger has passed, the Djinn is gone, and the child is safe. Let that be enough for tonight. Let it be more than enough. Close your eyes, slow your breath, and imagine the hush of the brass city fading into silence. Let it carry you gently toward dreams, where stories flow without endings, and where the stars always keep watch above you.